familiar with the work of the Mental Health Collaborative. But for those of you who may not know, I want to give you just a brief overview of the role of the Mental Health Collaborative here in Indian River County. Now, the collaborative was formed in 2004 by a group of mental health care funders who wanted to improve the continuum of care in the mental health arena here in our county. The United Way's Community Planning Committee had long ago identified that mental health issues were inextricably linked to many, if not most, of the other community-wide concerns, which obviously include issues such as homelessness, substance abuse, and domestic violence. Since then, the collaborative has grown from its original funding partners and now includes 25 members from various facets of the community, different organizations, individuals, funders, etc. And these members meet 5 times a year. And the collaborative has the following key goals in mind. We want to identify gaps in the mental health continuum and search for innovative ways to fill those gaps. We want to facilitate interagency relationships. We want to see everyone working cooperatively together, thereby decreasing turf issues, service duplication, and misallocation of funding. We want to present a unified front for this community to local and state governments. We also provide for early identification of mental health concerns that are developing in the community, and we work to continue to educate funders and the community about opportunities to improve the lives of the mentally ill in our community. And at this time, I'd actually like all the members of the Mental Health Collaborative, if you're present, please stand and be recognized. Now, I could talk to you at length about the current initiatives of the collaborative, but that is not today's agenda. I and other collaborative members, as well as Lisa Kale, who's pulled all of this together. She's hiding off to the side, but in the front row. Lisa, along with collaborative members, will all be available at the reception, which will follow this afternoon's symposium. We can take any questions about the Mental Health Collaborative that you might have. And in addition, materials and contact information about the Mental Health Collaborative are available at the check-in tables. We welcome your interest, we welcome your inquiries. And again, at the heart of this part of the program, we're just delighted at the turnout. I want to thank you all so very, very much for being here today. The next section of our program, the start of the heart of the program, will focus on mental illness from a personal perspective. Our first 3 presenters are members of our community, each of whom has a very personal and a profound perspective about the impact of mental illness. As you will hear, their stories reveal the immeasurable impact that mental illness has on individuals, on families, and on this community. The insights shared today and the courage and commitment required to share them should inform the decision of elected officials and community leaders as they move forward. We are delighted to have these representatives today, and if you would please first welcome to the podium our first presenter, Mary Sammartino.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Mary Sammartino, and I was asked to speak to you today about the struggle I encountered in finding help for my 10-year-old son, Luke, who is diagnosed with a serious mental illness. As I'm sure many of you know, being a mother is a full-time job. However, being the mother of a child with a mental illness presents additional challenges that are usually faced alone. People often see my son's behavior as unruly, undisciplined, or they blame me for poor parenting. Most do not see his behavior for what it is, a symptom of a disease. I am blessed with a supportive husband and a strong marriage, which helps alleviate the isolation that comes from parenting a child with mental illness. Other families in our same situation aren't as fortunate, and sadly end in divorce. Our journey began the day we brought Luke home from the hospital. As an infant, Luke's behavior was far beyond the normally fussy or colicky baby. He woke up almost every hour throughout the night, and not even my motherly touch could console him, and in fact, it tended to agitate him more. It's just a phase, we were told. When he was old enough to crawl, he would bang his head into the walls and floor. Again, we were told it was just a phase. But by the time he was 3, we had to pad the walls of his room to protect him from hurting himself. To avoid an institutional look, we camouflaged the padding with decorations. In our hearts, we knew this was only a temporary fix. It was not a solution to what we knew was a much bigger problem. During his 3rd year, Luke's hair started falling out. Our next step was a dermatologist 3 hours away, who specialized in children. In the few minutes she had to observe Luke, she suggested a full neurological and behavioral workup. We were referred to a special medical center in Weston, Florida. The doctors in Weston used MRIs and EEGs to rule out seizures, tumors, or brain damage. Clinical observations and a variety of medications came next. Eventually, they offered a diagnosis: behavior disorder not otherwise specified. We were far from relieved. It was a diagnosis of exclusion rather than a path toward healing. As parents, we were expected to medicate our child in order to make life at home more tolerable. It was a gut-wrenching decision, and I felt horribly depressed. Luke's medication trials were never easy. Most drugs barely worked or made his symptoms much worse. With the help of my mother, we continued the painful 3-hour car rides to Weston to see the doctor, with Luke screaming the entire way. Finally, when Luke was 5, a local neurologist began seeing children in Vero Beach. I made an appointment immediately. He repeated many of the same tests and tried a mix of several different medications with little benefit. In the end, he prescribed intensive speech, occupational and physical therapy, along with applied behavioral analysis. He recommended a program in San Francisco, California. Insurance wouldn't cover it, but we couldn't allow the financial burden to stop us from trying. So I packed my bags and flew across the country with my then 5-year-old son. We rented an apartment and spent a month in California undergoing intensive therapy for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. We can still see the benefit it had for Luke. However, we were back home in Florida with nowhere to continue that type of intensive therapy. Financially, we were tens of thousands of dollars in debt and had to rely on what would be covered by insurance. After a few more years of ups and downs and a psychiatrist or two, Luke was ready to enter the 2nd grade. The first day of school started like any other. I dropped him off and held on to my cell phone. It didn't take long. The call came at 10 a.m. Come get Luke. He had a meltdown, had to be restrained by the principal, and was unable to return to school. He was placed on hospital homebound, which provided 3 hours a week of at-home tutoring. Luke's rages and unbalanced behavior continued. I was trained to safely restrain him so he wouldn't have to call 911, which would result in an admission to an inpatient psychiatric program. We were again at our breaking point and willing to travel anywhere in search of relief for my son Luke. Our newly hired educational consultant suggested we see an acquaintance of hers, Dr. Dimitri Papoulos, author of the book The Bipolar Child. I was already aware of Dr. Papoulos and his research, having read his book and even tried to get an appointment with him at his New York office several years earlier. But this time was different. This time I had a connection on the inside. Dr. Papoulos is the Director of Research for the Juvenile Bipolar Research Foundation, which focuses on the root causes of childhood-onset bipolar disorder. He was one of the first psychiatrists in the world to recognize the possibly harmful effects of antidepressants and stimulants on children within the bipolar spectrum. For my husband and I, it all began to make sense. Antidepressants and stimulants had always been the first line of treatment for Luke during the early stages of his diagnosis. Each attempt at using these medications ended in disaster. We were now working with a doctor who understood why. After 2 months of treatment with Dr. Papoulos, Luke was able to slowly transition back to school. By year end, he was attending school half days. Today, Luke is doing well, or in mental health terms, clinically stable. He is happily attending private school, where I'm proud to say he made the honor roll in the 1st and 2nd quarters. For the first time in our family's life, we are enjoying the little things like basketball, swim team, and family vacations, which in the past were simply out of the question. Last summer, we took Luke to a dude ranch in Colorado where he explored a new love, fly fishing. We celebrated the holidays like other families with treats and decorating, Christmas parades, and family dinners. Occasionally, a neighborhood child will even knock on the door to see if Luke can play. Something as simple as this is a significant milestone for Luke. We still travel to New York a few times a year to see Dr. Papoulos and have phone appointments in between visits. While I'm grateful for the progress Luke has made, I still get sad when I think of the years we struggled to get to this point, years that my son suffered when he should have been having fun just being a kid. We are truly blessed to have gotten to this point. At times I hold my breath waiting for what is to come. Luke's story certainly isn't over. It doesn't have to end as many others do, with drug addiction, the justice system, or worse, suicide. Thanks to early intervention and treatment, we are so much more prepared to make sure Luke's ending is a happy one. In this room today, we have the power to work toward a mental health continuum that provides early diagnosis and treatment for all people who need it. That access will allow people suffering with mental illness to achieve stability and lead successful, fulfilling, and productive lives, a chance that I know my son Luke now has. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Next, I would like to introduce for the next personal perspective, Peggy Pilnicek.